So good morning, everyone. Um, so let's go ahead and start today with just a few prayers. All of you should have a gold prayer book on your table there. And if you don't have one, there's more in the cabinets in the back. And as usual, we're going to start with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha that's on page 73. So those of you who are new to these prayers, this first one is really just thinking of the Buddha who appeared some 2,500 years ago, 2,600 years ago, and whose teachings we follow. And trying to make that connection with the Buddha by admiring all the qualities of the Buddha that are embodied in these words, all the accomplishments, but to recall that every one of us can achieve this same state. We have Buddha nature, we have that potential to develop our own minds to that same degree. So we're trying to align ourselves with that thought as well, kind of seeking to make the strongest connection we can to the Buddha so that we then are able to use this life to progress on the path to achieving the same state that he did. So let's recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once in English, and then we'll go forward and do a few additional prayers. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Now go to page 75, just turn the page, and we'll begin with the second full verse there, where we continue paying homage to not just the Buddha, but to the Dharma, the teachings, the Sangha, the spiritual community who have developed realizations that we can rely upon. And then making homage to all those who are worthy of respect. And then this wonderful verse at the bottom of page 75 that encapsulates the Buddha's teachings. We'll read that together, and we'll continue on with a verse from the Diamond Cutter Sutra that helps us to understand the nature of things as fleeting and transitory, lacking any intrinsic existence. And then finally that verse on page 76 in the middle, that's sort of a thought that may all beings benefit from what we are doing here today. So let's go ahead and start again with the second verse on page 75. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits, may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Two more prayers. Go forward to either 97 or 98, depending on which version of the prayer book you have. You're looking for the short mandala offering prayer. That verse kind of is a way of, we're going to be talking today about the first perfection, the perfection of generosity. This is kind of a form of generosity where we think about offering not just everything that we own, but the phenomenal world at large and transforming it into a beautiful paradise, whatever that means to you, however you want to visualize that. And thinking that you're making that vast offering to receive the teachings, and also so that all beings can eventually enjoy such a pure land, such an ideal circumstance of having purified all of our minds. We'll continue after we do that, and we do the offering mantra that's on 98. We'll go on to the last prayer on page 98, refuge in bodhicitta before the teaching, which has those two ideas of our own refuge in the three jewels, as well as the motivation of bodhicitta that we'll also meditate on shortly. And we'll do that once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. So again, first the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field. and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chunyangi peso namgi drola penshir sangye druparsho. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi Daki Chunyangi Pe Sonamgi Dola Penshir Sangye Druparsho. Okay, you can set the prayer books aside and we'll do a short meditation before we begin the class. So again, in meditation, we're doing two things. First of all, calming the mind a bit by using the breath as an anchor, a meditation object. And I'll give you some instruction in that in a moment. And then after we do that, we'll set a motivation together so that what we do here today becomes most powerful. So first, just find a good meditation posture. Make sure that the back is somewhat straight and upright, but also releasing whatever tension you can in the body, especially around the neck and shoulder area, or other areas where you might have some stress, tension in the body. And then when you're ready, begin to attend to the breath. And if you have a technique that you already use to meditate on the breath, then by all means, you can do that for the next few minutes. And if you don't have a technique you regularly use, then I generally suggest this sensation at the tip of the nose to make that your meditation object. That sensation occurs when you breathe in and out of the nostrils. Whenever you lose your awareness of the breath, and regardless of what technique that you're using to focus on the breath, the job at that time is to restore your meditation, your attention, your concentration by letting go of whatever it was that distracted you and gently returning to the breath. So again, whatever technique you're working with the breath, just do the best that you can to maintain your awareness. Whenever the mind wanders, bring the mind back to the breath. We'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, then I'll lead you in a short reflection. So now let's set our motivation together. And sometimes it's really quite useful to go back to the very basics of what Buddhism is teaching us. The Buddha, in his observation, saw that all beings simply want to be happy and don't want to suffer. And recognize that this is true for you yourself, as well as for all other beings. No doubt something that brought you here today was a desire to find the causes of happiness, to try to relieve suffering. If we look at our lives and are honest with ourselves, most of what we have done in this life has not been able to create any real lasting peace or happiness, and also has not helped us to be rid of suffering, to not have to experience dissatisfaction, problems, difficulties, pain, suffering. But we can achieve a state that is true happiness, perfect peace, and moreover be free of everything that causes any sort of dissatisfaction, problems, suffering. This is the promise of the Buddha's teachings. That when the Buddha observed beings and saw that they had this fundamental drive, he simply was acknowledging that they went about it the wrong way. In order to achieve happiness, in order to be free from suffering, we have to practice these teachings that help us to achieve those states. Complete freedom from suffering, the well-being, the bliss that comes with attaining Buddhahood. So if we're genuinely concerned about ourselves, if we do want that happiness and freedom from suffering, then we should be 100% committed to this path. And of course, the way that we are most committed is by having this mind of bodhicitta, this mind that strives to be dedicated to the welfare of others, seeing that this is actually the way that we accomplish our own welfare as well. That your happiness and your freedom from suffering is very much bound up in others and their well-being. His Holiness the Dalai Lama speaks of this as being wisely selfish. That we can admit that we come to these teachings with some level of self-concern, but how do we do that most wisely? How do we use the time we have here together in the best way so that we achieve what we really seek and help others to do the same? It's through this mind of bodhicitta, this mind that strives to be a benefit to all beings without exception, regardless of who they are, whether they're humans, animals, what have you, regardless of their political party, regardless of their race, or their gender, their sexual orientation, whatever. We want all beings to benefit from what we're doing here today. And so that's the main intention behind bodhicitta, to cherish others, to hold them as most dear. But then the secondary thought, to recognize that in order to accomplish this, we have to become enlightened ourselves. This is the fulfillment of our own welfare. This is giving you the happiness and freedom from suffering that you seek, so you can then help others to do the same. So hold those two thoughts very firmly in your heart right now, that sincere wish to benefit others, and the recognition that to do that, you have to become a Buddha. And thereby you have to engage in these teachings, especially the teachings we'll be going into that explain how to practice the 6 perfections, how to go beyond our current limitations and achieve that state through our actions, through our thoughts, through our words. And see that this is the answer to that fundamental desire for happiness, that fundamental wish to be free from suffering. And hold that in your heart right now. Okay. So in this series of classes, and I don't know how long this is going to last, I haven't kind of looked at it to detail out We're going to go into the six perfections. So in the last class that we finished before I went on my week to spend some time with my mom, we went through the practice that Rinpoche encourages us to do at the beginning of every day. And recall that there were some things in that practice that alluded to the six perfections and the practice of this. And I just said, we'll get to that when we get to this course. So in this course, what we're going to do is kind of elaborate on all of those activities that the Bodhisattva does. Recalling that again, a Bodhisattva is a being who has this mind of bodhicitta that we were just meditating on and has developed it very firmly in our hearts. Of course, and we see that this mind of bodhicitta is not something that we have naturally. You're not coming out of the womb with bodhicitta and, wanting to benefit all beings and be dedicated to your own enlightenment. We have to learn how to develop this mind. And I'm not going to go into all of those techniques. That's kind of a whole nother course in and of itself. Know that when Geshe Sherab returns in May, no doubt there will be a Discovering Buddhism course on bodhicitta. That'll be on Saturday mornings where if he's teaching it, which I'm assuming he will, though we may have a visiting teacher at some point that would come in to do that, then they'll go through all the techniques for generating that mind. But it's a mind that's motivated by love and compassion for beings. Because having done the analysis that we did prior to developing bodhicitta, to see our own situation very clearly, to see that we ourselves are caught up in samsara, we ourselves are under the control of our karma and delusions, we ourselves are having to experience unbelievable suffering that we've been experiencing since beginningless time, and that we will continue to experience as long as the causes and conditions are there for that. We have to, go against those causes and conditions. We have to wish to become liberated ourselves. That's a very powerful thought. The mind of renunciation that turns away from all of what samsara offers us and recognizes that it's not a solution. This world, as wonderful as it can be and all the delightful, delicious things in it, is not a solution. We've experienced every good thing there is to experience in samsara sometime before, and it didn't bring us any lasting peace or satisfaction. We've also experienced unbelievable suffering, and so why should we continue to do this? So that's an important part of the spiritual path for a bodhisattva as well, is to generate that sincere wish to be free from all of one's own suffering. On the basis of that, we then simply translate that to every other being. Every other being is in the exact same predicament that we find ourselves in. So on the basis of that, and also by recognizing that they're suffering, that they want to be happy, seeing their situation clearly, and also by feeling a closeness to those beings, which again is something we do have to work on. We currently are close to some beings, and we have a lot of animosity towards other beings, and we have a lot of indifference towards the large part of beings in this world. We don't really, not moved by their situation. So we have to enlarge our hearts. This is the process of developing bodhicitta, is to make our hearts bigger and bigger so that they become boundless, and we can eventually include all beings in the scope of that. Well, bodhicitta in and of itself is a wonderful aspiration, at least when we talk about it in that way, but it needs to become active. What we mean by the six perfections are the ways in which we are able to take that bodhicitta motivation and make it a part of our lives. Master Shantideva, in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which Geshe Sherab taught on previously, and I'm sure some of you have also had other teachings on this, there's two wonderful verses in the very first chapter that's about bodhicitta, about the awakening mind. And in these, he speaks to kind of the two aspects of bodhicitta. He says, bodhicitta, the awakened mind, is known in brief to have two aspects. First, aspiring, bodhicitta in intention. Then, active, bodhicitta, practical engagement, as corresponding to the wish to go and then the actual setting out. The wise should understand respectively the difference that divides these two. So a lot of what we talk about when we say bodhicitta is that first type, the aspiring mind, the mind that has the intention of going. It's kind of like if you always wanted to go to India to do the pilgrimage of all the holy sites and what have you, and you kind of hold that kind of thought day in and day out. You might think, oh, it'd be nice to go to India and see, Bodh Gaya and see the stupa there and do all these wonderful things. But you never do anything to go there, right? You just have the aspiration, the wish. That's powerful. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that will eventually get you there, but it's not enough, right? You'll never see the stupa in Bodh Gaya if you don't make some effort to go there. So it's the same with our bodhicitta. We can have this aspiration and we need to grow it very deeply. But the aspiration alone is not going to get you to the result. It's not going to get you to the goal. You need to have engaging bodhicitta or practical bodhicitta, active bodhicitta. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this course, is how do we take this sincere aspiration that we are cultivating and trying to develop day in and day out and make it into something that actually becomes a part of our lives, to how we live our lives. Now, we won't be able to practice it to the largest degree, to make it actually a perfection, as these are called, because that's obviously in the resultant state. It is interesting that they use this word perfection. It's the translation of the Sanskrit word paramita. Paramita literally means to go beyond to the other shore, kind of to transcend, to move out of the unenlightened state that we are in to the state of enlightenment. But they use the word perfection, which is a case, they say, of giving the name of the result to the cause, because the result is the actual perfection of Buddhahood. We get into a lot of stuff around the use of the word perfection in our culture, like, you can't possibly be perfect and everything. Well, Buddhism teaches that there is a state where you have attained that kind of perfection, where you no longer have anything that obscures, that weakens your mind, and you only have all the positive qualities developed to an unbelievable degree. So it is totally possible to attain that perfect state. And we need the perfections, these practices, in order to do that. They are a key part of what the Bodhisattva practices. Sometimes they divide the Bodhisattva's practices into two main things. One is that we have to develop our own minds so that we are able to help others most effectively. But the other side of it is we also have to be concerned about others. We also have to be involved in their welfare. The 6 perfections are the way to do that first task. And that doesn't mean that they are done in isolation, because as you'll see, the first one right from the beginning, generosity, it has to be done with other beings, right? You have to at least be thinking of other beings while you're having a mind of giving and so on. But nonetheless, it is a primary way of developing your heart so that you can, have this unbounded quality to go beyond your own limitations and achieve that state. So it's always about kind of pushing you further and further. Whereas there are another set of things, and I'll go into these very briefly in this introductory session where we look at the 6 perfections. There are also what are called the 4 ways of attracting disciples, the 4 ways of trying to bring people into your sphere of influence so that you can help them. Not because Buddhism isn't into proselytizing. This doesn't mean I'm going to give you a little kit at the end of today and you have to go out and knock on people's doors and say, can I talk to you about Buddhism today? Leave a little copy of Mandala magazine there or something. No, I mean, that's not what we're into, right? But those beings who are in your life, who you have a karma with, who come into your life and are, there because you've got something going on with them, whether it be in a positive or a negative vein, you want to try to find ways to benefit them, to attract them, and to make sure that you do everything you can to support their spiritual growth in whatever way that looks like. Again, in His Holiness's view, everything that exists in this world that's around spiritual growth is the work of the Buddhas, is the work of enlightened beings to try to help others, whether it be Christian teachings or New Age teachings or whatever. If it's helping beings with their minds and their hearts to develop themselves in a positive way, it's the work of what we call Buddhas, what other people in other traditions might call, the beneficent God or whatever. I mean, it's the work of that in our world. So we also have to be concerned about that. So the primary task that a bodhisattva engages in, and what are mainly taught on the great level of the stages of the path, we call it, there are 3 levels of the stages of the path. The first one where we kind of get our minds around karma and determine how we are going to shape our future lives. The second one where we look at our bigger situation and understand that we're in samsara and wish for that individual freedom from that we just talked about earlier. And the third level, the level of the person of the greatest capacity, where we go beyond just ourselves to think of all beings. So the 2 tasks that are taught as part of the great scope after developing bodhicitta really are the 6 perfections and the 4 means of attracting disciples. The 6 perfections is the means of developing your own mind, and the ways of attracting disciples is a way to be concerned about others, to be involved in their life, to help them as best as you can. Now, obviously, as I said, the 6 perfections do help others as well. It's not to say that they're removed from others, but that they're primarily tools to help us. That's why we call this course Transcending Our Limitations. It's because we're always trying to push beyond where we see our limitations at currently. Those limitations are not cast in stone. Where you see your boundaries of giving, for example, we're going to talk about this a little bit today, is simply acknowledges that's where it's at right now. And it probably is different than where it was at earlier in your life. And it can be different later in your life. And it can continue to develop more and more and more. These perfections can be practiced in that way, that they are continually growing and expanding. So they're wonderful tools to help us in our life, to have more happiness in our life, as well as to bring greater happiness to others. So the progression of the 6 perfections, I'm going to put them on the board in a moment. They often talk about them in terms of different ways of practice. They are said to be set out from the 1st through the 6th, being literally the easiest to the hardest. But for every one of us, we're going to probably have differences in that to some degree. We might find some of them more difficult earlier on rather than later on. But know that they are taught in terms of the more profound, difficult ones to practice are the last. The easier ones are towards the beginning. So I don't know in terms of the online teaching whether it's easier to, should I put it over here, the whiteboard? Okay. So let me go ahead and put the 6 up here. And maybe I'll do them one at a time, and then well, I'll put them all up, and then folks at home can also see them as we go through these. Most of you know these, but nonetheless. The first one is, as I said, generosity or giving. The second one has different words. I'm going to use what's on the sheet that I'm going to give you for that one when we get to that. It's called ethical discipline, essentially morality. But keep in mind, in Buddhism, morality's got a slightly different feel to it. It's not, you know, the moralistic tone that's in other spiritual traditions is maybe not quite as heavy. The third one is what we know as patience or tolerance. The fourth, I'll put again how we often refer to it in the text, but know that there are other synonyms for this. Joyous effort, sometimes called enthusiasm or perseverance. The fifth one, concentration. And by this we mean meditative stabilization. And again, I'll get into that in just a moment. I'm going to give a brief introduction to each of these. The last one being wisdom. Okay. So let's take a look at each of these, and generosity is going to be the topic mostly for today after I do this introduction to the 6 perfections. Generosity, you can see, is in some ways one of the easiest because it's simply this practice that we already engage in to some degree already, right? Every one of us has some acts of generosity, even if, you know, all you do is you feed your pets. Well, you're being generous to them, right? You're feeding them, you're giving them food. They'd have to fend for themselves if it wasn't for you. Probably not a pretty picture, right? You know, so generosity, we all practice to some degree. And generally, the first 3 are highlighted as primarily practices for lay people, those who are not ordained. And there's reasons for that, you know. But nonetheless, know that it doesn't mean we don't practice the other 3. It just means that we might emphasize these a bit more. And why is that? Well, especially if we look at generosity, one of the main ways that we're generous is in terms of material wealth, right? Well, ordained people become ordained so that they can focus primarily on spiritual practice. You know, to be ordained and then to focus one's life on making a lot of money to be generous isn't really the right way to live an ordained life. So for those of us, all of us in the room who are lay, and anyone else listening who's lay, generosity, moral discipline, ethical discipline, again, this means following the law of karma and avoiding the unskillful actions that are taught and engaging in those that are positive. Generally, it means refraining from harming others and engaging in what is beneficial to others. That little verse that we read at the beginning of the class today, do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Those 2 lines encompass what we primarily mean by ethical discipline as a general teaching. On the Bodhisattva path, it involves a lot more. It involves also upholding one's Bodhisattva vows, making sure that one continues to be of benefit to others as best as one can. And so we'll be looking at that dimension of it as well. Patience. Of course, patience is something we need in our culture a lot, right? Because there are lots of sources of irritation, annoyance, anger, hatred. So this is the ability for us to have an undisturbed mind in the face of whatever it is that we're experiencing that can be challenging for us. So this is obviously a way that we also benefit others. Ethical discipline helps us to benefit others because as we take more delight in engaging in virtue, we stop harming other beings. They become the source of our actions of benevolence rather than our actions of harm. And so patience also, if we are patient with others, which is a hard mind to develop, to be patient at all times with whatever is going on, to have a mind that's undisturbed, not going to that place of anger, rather mostly going to the place of compassion, a place of concern and care for others who are harming us. Because if others are harming us, it's because they're under the control of their own crazy minds, and they should be ideally an object of compassion. And we'll get into lots of the techniques around developing patience when we get to that in this course. Joyous effort is kind of interesting. You might think, well, wow, those first three seem pretty tough already, but joyous effort, you might think, is easy compared to those. But I think what we're talking about here is this unbridled enthusiasm for our practice, where we just engage in it and are so, we're totally into practice. We used the phrase in yesterday's class, practice like your hair is on fire, to have that kind of, we just really are totally consumed with our Dharma practice. And I would say for most of us in the room, we have parts of our day where we're more enthusiastic than others. And we have a lot of our day where most of our effort and joy is put into mundane activities. So this is about developing our minds to have that kind of perseverance and enthusiasm for the Dharma that becomes more and more of your life till you get to a place where it's all of your life. I always use Lama Zopa as an example of that type of being, right? Who's totally consumed with Dharma. And even Venerable Rabina, who was mentioned, she's coming here in April. She, for example, and you might want to meet with her and just, see who she is or whatever. She's always real clear about if she's going to spend time with anybody, she wants to know, is it Dharma related? Are they going to talk to me about Dharma? Because she doesn't want to waste time talking about the weather and the stock market and whatever else, She's there to talk about Dharma. And that's already, again, showing her enthusiasm for the Dharma. She wants to make sure that her interactions with others are beneficial to them, that there's something that is directed towards changing the mind that you're discussing. So while it might look kind of easy to do in the face of some of the other ones, it actually is a pretty difficult thing to get to that level. And that's why, once more, we each have to kind of, a lot of what we're going to do when we go through each of these is kind of look at ourselves currently and understand where we are, but to see how do we move a bit beyond that? How do we recognize that we do have some limitations currently and how much enthusiasm we have for our practice? What does it look like to try to make that a little bit stronger? Concentration, as I said, this is like a meditative stabilization. This is obviously a bit more difficult to achieve. What we are talking about here is a level of meditation where one's mind can remain single-pointedly focused on any virtuous object that one chooses for as long as one wishes. And the body is very serviceable. The mind is extremely serviceable. You can sit in meditation for as long as you wish. Has anyone got that in the room? I certainly don't, So most of us find it really difficult to sit in meditation for, whatever. I mean, each of us are at a different stage of our own development. If you are able to spend hours in meditation, that's great. But most of us don't have that ability yet. So here we're talking about, and in the traditional Lamrim teachings, they go, of course, into extensive teachings on how to develop this mind that's called calm abiding, that has those qualities, where you are able to stay with that virtuous object as long as you wish. It precedes and is necessary, as are to a large degree the other ones, to develop the last perfection, the perfection of wisdom. Wisdom, of course, here can have a lot of different connotations. We can talk about in general. The factor of wisdom is our ability to correctly discern and analyze things, to know things in a correct way. But we're not just talking about conventional knowledge, which is, of course, what's taught in a lot of the Lamrim prior to this, to understand clearly the role of karma in our situation, as we are going through in the Saturday class on samsara and nirvana, to understand the factors that lead to us going from life to life through the Four Noble Truths and so on. It's not just developing that conventional wisdom, understanding how things work in samsara. It's understanding the deepest truth that will help us to undermine that whole process, which is the wisdom of emptiness, the wisdom of selflessness. So obviously, I don't know if I'm going to get to all of these in my time remaining. I'm here till Venerable Rabina comes, essentially, until the third week of April in terms of teaching. And then after she leaves, Geshe Sherab will be here shortly after. So I don't know if I'll get through all these, but if not, we'll pick it up where I left off when I return in the next time. So So that's an overview of these. And we can see that already going through them, that to some degree, we can see the complexity and them becoming much more challenging the further up we go. So these three, as I said, the first three mostly for lay people, these three they say are primarily for the ordained. Now, again, given that, we still, doesn't mean, oh, well, then that's where I stop. I just do the first three perfections in this life and don't worry about the others. No, because we obviously see how joyous effort even plays into all of those. Our concentration will help in all those. Even our wisdom will help in all of those. We're going to talk about each of these in terms of how do we practice each of them within each of them. It's that you practice all six perfections within generosity and so on. This is another way of looking at these. My whole goal in this, as I said, was to help us to kind of move beyond our limitations, but also to find the way that we can make any action that is in line with any of these, that we can make them as powerful as possible. And I'm going to talk about that as we go through each of these, because every opportunity that we have to practice these, we want to make sure that we get the most bang for your buck kind of thing, that you do what will help you to get the greatest possible merit. Recall that in the Bodhisattva path, we often talk about, besides all those activities and things that I've talked about, we can say that essentially there are two main things that we're focused on. Wisdom, this kind of wing of wisdom that they say it's like two wings of a bird that help the bird to fly. The wing of wisdom is both the conventional knowledge of things and the ultimate knowledge of things. It is a key part of our path. That's why we have teachings in Buddhism. And why we are giving information constantly is to help people to have correct wisdom, correct understanding of the Buddhist teachings. That funnels then into, wanting to pursue a path that will lead to that ultimate state of wisdom that is Buddhahood. On the other hand, we have often what is called like the method side of things, which is the compassion side of things. The compassion side of things is where we engage in all the practices that help us to accumulate some positive potential behind all of that, that help us to make all of that a bit more active in the world. So most of the perfections, generally, they split them up differently in different presentations, but these first four are generally said to be part of the method side of it. They're kind of the ways in which we engage in our conventional world with an understanding of things to try to be more generous, more moral in terms of our behavior, more patient with others, be enthusiastic about our practice. Sometimes enthusiasm and joyous effort is moved down with these two, though. These are primarily the wing of wisdom, primarily what gets us into developing that deeper wisdom that will help us to be free of our own suffering, but moreover to achieve Buddhahood and help others. But as and there's even another presentation that says the first three are the method, the last two are wisdom, and joyous effort is both. And that makes some sense as well. But as I said, all of these are interactive and influencing each other. And that's what's wonderful about them too, is they're complementary practices. They're not totally divided from each other, although they might look different from the list here. They very much complement each other. So that's kind of an overview of how they are worked with in terms of the traditional teachings and how they're set out in the Lam Rim. So again, while we may not be able to perfect them in this lifetime, as they are set out as the perfections, they're really not perfections until we attain Buddhahood, we can develop these qualities more and more and more. So that's my goal in this course, and that's why I'm happy to be presenting these teachings, and I hope all of you are somewhat enthusiastic about this survey of them and trying to get into them in a little bit more detail. And as I said in the materials, I really do want to keep this as practical as possible. I don't want to get too theoretical. It'd be kind of a shame if after all this time we come out with a theoretical understanding of these, but we don't have any way of practicing them. That would be ridiculous, right? The Lam Rim and all these teachings are meant to be practiced. Rinpoche always emphasizes that. He says, it's not like we study the Lam Rim over here and then we practice something different. The Lam Rim is the practice. And these are all part of the Lam Rim. Lam Rim, again, those of you who aren't familiar with those terms, Tibetan terms, Lam means path, Rim means stages or graded. And the idea is that we go through a gradual process of developing our minds in the same way that our current education system in this country takes you from a very young age all the way through your young adult years, giving you a full education. And you need to develop that gradually. You can't expect to go into university at age 5. It just doesn't work. If you showed up at the university at age 5, they'd say, no, you need to develop a lot more skills to allow you to be here, right? So it's the same thing. For us to be at the Bodhisattva level, we have to have all the other teachings. But what we're going to do in this course is primarily focus on when we arrive there, when we have this wish, this aspiration to become a Buddha for the sake of others, this bodhicitta, what does our behavior look like? What is it that we're engaging in? How is it that we're trying to develop our minds to go beyond our limitations to achieve these states? So that's a brief introduction to the 6 perfections. Any questions on that from online or from the Gompa? Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into the first one. To do this, I thought it might be kind of interesting to do a little exercise. Those who are online may not find the full, well, they can do it at home, certainly. I was thinking it'd be nice to have people partner up and maybe discuss these a little bit. I'm gonna send around these blank cards and you can write on them, but you can also, if you've got a notebook with you and you wanna write on that, you can do that. Does anyone need pens or pencils or something to write with? Few people, so I think we have some over on, I don't know if there's some on the table, maybe in the drawers. Oh, there's right on the side there where the envelopes are. Right side, Amy. There's a few pens there. And I'm going to write up 3 questions. Or actually, I'll give you the question and then I'll write it up and you can spend a little time with the first question and then I'll go ahead and put the second one on. So I'm going to erase the 6 perfections. Sorry, those of you who didn't get them down. The last time I did this exercise, I still have my card from when I wrote down my answers to it. So it's kind of nice to hold on to your card and kind of look back at it a few years later and see, you know, what may have changed for you or what answers might be a little bit different. Very first question. In what ways are you generous? And there's more to the question here. In your life now and in the recent past. So spend a little time writing down that. In what ways are you generous in your life now and in the recent past? Whatever comes to you. And just mark that as number 1. In the meantime, I'll write number 2 up here, but give you a few minutes to do that. Again, let your mind really go out to whatever. I mean, think about all your daily activities and what would you consider to be generosity? Because I think it's a lot more than what you think. That's why I'm planting that seed.
I cannot read 2.
Well, I'm going to go through 2 in a moment.
Oh, okay.
Give another minute or so for the first one. Okay, so you can continue with the first one if you like. I'm going to go ahead and read what the second one is, and you can do that as you see fit. In what additional ways would you like to be generous in the future? I mean, do you have some ideas, some things that you can already envision that would be a way of extending your own generosity? Can kind of going beyond where you are currently? Again, just let whatever comes to mind. And it's just this, you're not making a commitment to this. You know, you're just entertaining that idea of what does it look like to go beyond? What sorts of practices of generosity would you like to do in your life in the future? And again, you're welcome to continue with the second or even the first if you're still working with that. But the third question is, in relation to the second one, what is keeping you from being generous in those additional ways? And be honest, but this is for, again, we will have an opportunity to share it with one other person. It's not going to be shared in the larger public. So be honest with yourself and what you see as the hindrances, the things that are keeping you from being generous in those additional ways. Okay, so maybe take just another minute or so. Again, look back over the 3 questions and your answers and see if there's anything else that's come to mind. And as I said, we're going to do a little dyads, pairs to talk about this. What I'd like you to do is discuss with each other and maybe give 5 minutes to each person to talk. And if you don't need 5 minutes, that's fine, but up to 5 minutes, and I'll ring the bell after 5 minutes. The first person talks and the other person just listens. And the first person can talk about whatever you're comfortable sharing on that. You don't have to share everything. Or even you can just talk about what that exercise was like for you in general, or what's it like to look at this whole idea of generosity, and just share whatever you want while the other person listens, and then switch roles for the remaining 5 minutes, okay? So we'll do a 10-minute exercise of doing that. If some people want to go out into the other room or go upstairs, you're certainly welcome to. So upstairs is really warm though, keep that in mind, the way the heating is in this building. Those of you who are online, I apologize. I mean, there is a way on Zoom to break people out into discussion groups, but I'm not so sure that we'd be able to manage that right now. So those of you who are online, maybe you can just reflect on what you wrote down. And you have an extra kind of 10 minutes then to do whatever, because we're going to take a break right after this, okay? So again, get together with somebody, and the 5 minutes start in 10 seconds. Yeah, maybe we can stop the recording and we'll reconvene at the after the break. Online, Mark was sharing that he learned something new in this exercise, forgiveness as generosity, to give forgiveness to others, to be kind of in that space of, I don't know what another word for forgive is, to allow people to have the space for that healing, for that being forgiven. Anything else on that, Mark, or no? Okay. Yeah, Leah, did you have your hand up?
I was just going to say, it was really good for me because I started seeing myself making all these excuses.
Yeah.
And
we all do it. Yeah. So what was shared from Leah was, for those online, was that when you do the third part in particular about what's keeping you from being generous in those ways, the ways that we make excuses. And we do this in our culture pretty easily, right? I don't have time. I've tried to watch how I say that, so that I say, I can't make time for that right now, or I choose not to make time for that right now. It's really a choice. Our time is mostly in our own domain. We just tend to think everything else controls it. So, there's a lot of things that we might say it's time, we might say it's other factors that are keeping us. But I think we have to do a deeper investigation to see, are those valid excuses or ways that are true obstacles, or is that in our own minds? Yeah. So, yes, Bill.
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, it was a great question. And I find that the words doing and being get shifted around
Uh-huh.
a bit. And I'm not trying to figure out what I could do to be more generous. It's like, how open can I be to it, whatever it is that's coming in?
Mhm.
Allow it to make myself available.
Okay.
And so it isn't, they're not things that I could, I'm sure there are things I could do, but it's more through my meditation, and I meditate a fair amount.
Mhm.
And I for the last 8 years.
Good.
Every day without music. And that there's something about the openness of, staring at the ball
Mhm.
that it eventually develops.
Uh-huh. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a nutshell, for those online, it was the idea that Bill brought up of doing versus being, and that he's seeing maybe not the questions of how to be generous in ways of doing, but in ways of being that are enhanced by meditation and by presence and what being open to others and to what comes to.
And finding that
Yeah.
meditation does lead, at least with me,
Mhm.
to greater openness than I was.
Good. And that meditation leads to that greater openness, so that you're more available to others and what have you. Good. Again, this is about, again, how a lot of those, the 6 perfections, all of them interact with each other. If we do develop some presence with others, and we can be more attentive and available to them. And that can be a way of our being with others is a gift, as is the forgiving. How do we be with the people that we live with? That unconditional presence with them, that attention upon them, that desire to be in their lives in a more constructive way. I mean, that's all ways of being generous. This is why I think that we have to, and what I'm looking for in this whole course is expanding our view of what is generosity. Not that we become kind of complacent and say, well, I already practice plenty of generosity then, so why do I need to do any more? But just to really relish the ways that we do, and to see how we can augment that. Maybe not necessarily by doing more, but even by bringing more power to what we do through deeper motivation, deeper intention. It's another aspect that we'll be looking at. Thank you for sharing that, all of you. Anyone else, anything from this exercise? Judith?
We talked a bit about the lack of employment and health. And I think I could say aging too, they're all excuses.
Mm.
And it's our culture that well, when I have this much money, then I can do something.
Mm-hmm.
And you're gonna have to wait a long time in this
Yeah.
country.
Yeah. So Judith was sharing back on the topic of excuses, of scarcity being another one, or thinking because we're not employed or we don't have the resources now. We'll look at that as one of the hindrances that it's traditionally set out as well, because that is a mentality that we bring into it, is, that I could be in real danger if I give, so. And then being elderly, having more constraints on our physical well-being, that we find it harder to perhaps be generous in the ways that we might traditionally do, but doesn't mean that we can't, so we'll be exploring a lot of that too. Yeah, these are great. Good things that came up. I hope people enjoyed it to some. It's not like a revolutionary exercise. It's not some, but it's a nice way to just get into this topic and to begin to think, first of all, to be really spend, a little bit of time thinking about this too, and rejoicing in the way in which you are already generous. Give yourself a lot of credit for the ways that you are generous, because that's great. How amazing. There are a lot of miserly people in this world, a lot of people who are holding really tightly to their resources, to their time, energy, whatever, and not sharing so much with others. So really rejoice in this, and then do look to how you can expand. But yeah, Mark.
There's one thing that came up for me. I realized that at some level, I'm thinking, if I give, I lose. They win,
Yeah.
I lose.
Yeah.
And then when I started really going back and thinking about the gifts I give, I'm going, wait a minute. That's not what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I won. Or
Mhm.
we both won.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling I got more out of the gift than
Yeah.
you did.
Yeah.
I really do.
That is one of the magical things about giving. Mark is pointing out to the fact that we might initially have the thought, if I give, then I lose, but we actually win by giving, and the other person wins by giving, or the recipients of our generosity. it is a win-win situation. It goes back to what I said in the motivation about being wisely selfish, that actually, and we're going to get into this topic shortly, of the karma of generosity, that when we give, we are actually not just giving to that person, we're in a sense giving to our future self, because the karma is there, that is undeniable, that is an ineffable law of cause and effect, by way we will benefit from that. And again, it's not to say that that's why we do it, but there's never any loss involved. And even what we get in kind of the mental kind of high, or all the endorphins that happen when we feel good about what we're doing for others, that's a way that we also kind of receive in that moment. I think it was in the book of Joy, which we did some teachings on, the 8 pillars of joy. The Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, of course, in a theistic tradition that he's in, he says, it seems like there must be something wrong, with the way God created us, because it would seem that when you give, there's less of you remaining, but there's actually more, and so he speaks to that experience that I think we all have, that we feel kind of a bigger self after doing that, not in an inflated, egotistical way, but in the sense of we become greater by virtue of our acts of generosity and kindness. So there is no losing in this situation. And in fact, one of the things we do need to be careful of, we'll touch on this as well to some degree, is regret after giving. Because sometimes we do have that mind that creeps in there, right? Say one day you're feeling really generous and you give somebody $20, that you see on the street or something, because you just feel like I'm gonna test the waters here. And then later that day you're going, oh my gosh, I gave that person $20, and you're thinking, well, where am I going to get that $20 back from, or whatever. It's important not to have a regret with our positive actions as much as possible. It sort of takes all of the energy away from it. So we have to watch those states of mind that kind of question that. If we keep developing the intention and keep growing it, pushing the envelope bit by bit, stay in our comfort zone to some extent, but keep pushing beyond that, then I think we'll be fine. Don't remember, we talked about this in those verses that we went through as part of the daily practice, right? About giving one's body resources and so on. Well, most of us aren't ready to give our body to another being in the way that like the Buddha did as a bodhisattva, and giving his body to a tigress who was starving with her cubs and so on. We're not ready to do that, folks. We're not ready to do a lot of acts of generosity yet, but we can be able, if we keep moving in that direction. But Buddha Shakyamuni as that bodhisattva, that was a pretty highly developed being already, but centuries before, lifetimes before, he wasn't that developed. His mind was as stingy and miserly as ours is, so we just work with where we're at and keep moving in that direction. Any other comments from the exercise before we go on? All right, so let's define what we are talking about. It's kind of interesting. I had to do a whole exercise on being generous without even telling you what it is, but I think we kind of know what it is. But Buddhism has a slightly different way of looking at what generosity is. I'm going to share with you the definition that is used in the context of the 6 perfections. It is the intention to give and the actions of body and speech that are motivated by it. And of course, because it's a part of the perfections of a bodhisattva, it would be then also motivated by bodhicitta, motivated together with this strong wish to become a Buddha for the sake of others. So looking at that definition, we see that the very first part of it is the intention to give. Now, I know we all grew up with that phrase of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? It doesn't mean that the intention doesn't have any value, though. Intention, having the willingness, the intention to give, the desire to give is where it all starts. And we can even practice if we are, without resources, if we cannot at that time give something to someone else, you still can practice giving, because it is mostly a mental state we're talking about here. In fact, I keep pointing up here as if the 6 perfections were still here. They're kind of in shadows behind this, but the 6 perfections are all mental practices that do have sometimes physical and verbal components to them. But they all start with the mind, as we know from our Buddhist practice, right? It's all about the mind, all about this part of our being that is our experiential component, that is where all of our thoughts are formulated, where everything starts. we don't just start speaking and acting without our mind being involved. I mean, maybe if you've got Tourette's or something like that, you do have, a condition whereby you say or do things that aren't under your control because of your nervous system. But essentially, we act because our minds direct us to act in particular ways. So while we will be talking about actions of generosity as part of this, keep in mind the main practice is the intention to give, the mind that wants to give, that wants to be free with what one has in whatever way that looks like. So this is an important part to, recognize. So when we talk about this being a perfection, we say that it's a virtuous mind of giving, an intention to give, or the actions that come from that, motivated by bodhicitta, that will precede that act and accompanies that act, whether it be, again, a mental act or a physical, verbal act. So again, the determinant of whether it's a perfection of generosity isn't the actual physical giving or the verbal giving or even, what itself is given, the act or the gift that is given. It's rather the mind state. What are we doing in our minds? So this is why, like I said, I'm tacking this course on to what we went through in terms of the meditation for the beginning of our day. That if we direct our minds to have bodhicitta motivation, well then with that bodhicitta motivation, we engage in the perfection of generosity. We try to practice that mind that desires to give, that doesn't want to reinforce its opposing state, which is that state of miserliness, holding tight to everything that we have, not being willing to part with all of that. So this is kind of what we mean by this. I want to share one other thing that is often brought up in the traditional teachings around this whole idea of the 6 perfections being primarily mental practices. It also means then that there's no external measure of when you've achieved that. You might think, well, if generosity is all about relieving the needs of others and giving what we can so that others have what they desire, well then it'll be perfected when they all have what they want. Right? Is such a thing possible? Again, Master Shantideva in the 5th chapter, he goes into this for each of them, and I will share the verses for each of the 6 perfections as we go through them. For giving, this is what he says: if transcendent giving, or the perfection of giving, is to dissipate the poverty of beings, in what way, since the poor are always with us, have former Buddhas practiced it? I mean, there's the proof right there. You've got these beings who've attained the perfection of Buddhahood, and thereby the perfection of generosity. Well, poor are still here, sorry, that hasn't been alleviated. So how can it possibly mean that? The second verse, verse 10 from chapter 5, he says, transcendent giving, so the teachings say, consists in the intention to bestow on every being all one owns, together with the fruits of such a gift, together with the merits that we accumulate by our giving. We want to be giving all of that away to others. It is indeed a matter of the mind itself. And this is what he does in that 5th chapter, is he talks about each of them being a mental state, which is kind of revolutionary. And I would even question how many of you on your list of how you are already generous, or even ways you'd like to, focused on mental things, things that were mental only. She did? Okay, good, good. Yeah, so it's good. A few of you did, but this is another way to enlarge our understanding of how we are generous. I mean, one little action that we frequently encourage people to do is to offer your food before you eat it. Well, is that a physical act? I mean, you're going to go out and like find somebody to eat your food for you, and say, here, I can't, I want to offer this meal to you. You offer the food to the 3 jewels, to your guru, to all beings, with the intention that they all have what they need to sustain their lives, to have their nutrition, to have whatever it is. I mean, all these sorts of thoughts we can generate, right? While we're just sitting there eating our food. Okay, it's a mental act. It doesn't involve actually taking the physical food and giving it to somebody. If you can do that, great. I mean, I'm not saying don't do that, but look at all the ways that you are practicing generosity through those types of actions. They are equivalent. They are, again, where it starts is the intention to give, to bestow on all beings. This is why whenever we do these practices, I always am encouraging people to think big in terms, and Rinpoche does an amazing job of this, to think big in terms of who will benefit from what we're doing. To never let it be just about me sitting down and doing what I'm doing, eating food, listening to music, whatever the case might be. We can extend those to others. So again, this is, I guess the question that follows, if you didn't include those, well, maybe even after class, you might go back and you've got your little sheet of paper or your notebook, add into it the ways that you're practicing generosity that are purely mental. Giving away the pleasure you experience from various things, having a desire that your food, the food that you eat, could be offered to others and what have you. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the karma of generosity. And most of you already have had teachings in karma. Karma is a fundamental principle in all of Buddhism, though I guess different traditions emphasize it in different ways. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there's just a strong dependency upon this idea because it is essentially a law of cause and effect, but the law of cause and effect in terms of the experience of beings. Whereas we have the law of cause and effect that's happening in the world around us, whereby things occur in nature and what have you, that's evident, and we can see that, and we can know that there's various things going on by observing the world around us. It's not that evident to see the way that karma is working, though. And we can study the Buddha's teachings on karma, and we can come to appreciate what they're saying, but I can't prove it to you. Again, you can prove it to yourself by eventually knowing that truth at a very deep level. And when you become a Buddha, you know karma in all of its intricacies so that you know everything that's involved. A Buddha would be able to look at any one of you in the room and know exactly why you're in the situation that you're in, everything that has led you to that, all the causes and conditions, what karma is prone to ripe, what is going on, all of this, they would have a complete understanding of that. Sorry, I don't have that, So I can't prove it to you. I can't say that karma absolutely exists. But karma is the idea that everything that we do, primarily mentally, again, because we're talking about the mind here as being central, but nonetheless, the actions that come from my mind, physical and verbal actions, all of those have an energy that they create that we are the recipient of further down the road. Be it positive or negative, be it something that brings about happiness or suffering, we are the creators of that. So again, I don't need to sell this to most of you in the room because you've already been around Dharma a lot and have learned about karma. The karma of generosity is that essentially everything that we have in our lives that brings us any measure of comfort, happiness, what have you, was produced through your own generosity. If you've got a roof over your head and a full refrigerator and money in your bank account, it all came from your generosity. There's no doubt about it. It is a product. And you might say, well, but my money in my bank account came from my employer. They direct deposited in there. And that's why, I go in and I spend 40 plus hours every week and I get that money because, I do all that work. That's a condition for that to arise. There are a lot of people who work 40 hours a week and don't get the money that you get, or don't get any money at all, probably in some countries. You are doing all of that as a condition that leads to the ripening of that karma. But if you didn't create that karma in the past, you wouldn't experience those resources in the present. So with that karmic understanding, one, we can have a great appreciation for all the stuff that we do have in our lives. Gratitude isn't one of the 6 perfections, but it definitely ties into the perfection of generosity. The gratefulness that we can have for what we do possess in our life, acknowledging that we were the primary creators of that. I mean, be grateful for your employer and for the other people who help with your welfare and what have you, all the other beings that are involved. But be grateful that you had the strength of mind to practice generous acts in the past that have led you to have that right now. But don't rest on your laurels, be happy you have all that, but feed that into the future orientation to recognize that if we do want to have resources in the future, in this lifetime, in other lifetimes, you have to create the causes now. You can't wait and do it later because karma takes some time to ripen. This is one of the things John Lennon sang about instant karma. Well, maybe there's sometimes when it looks like instant karma, but it really isn't. It's a force that does take some time for it to come around and produce the results. So in terms of our future orientation, well, why do we want to have resources? Why do we want the karma of generosity operating in our lives? Well, yes, it helps to be a little more comfortable. I mean, all of us in the room, are well fed and taken care of. We're fairly comfortable, so we can practice the Dharma. We can do things, with this life. That's an important part of it. But it is also important that we have resources so we can benefit others. If we are on this Bodhisattva path, right, then we don't want to be without the resources. And some of you spoke to that as being one of your hindrances. It's feeling like I don't have all the resources to be able to give physically. Well, then practice now mentally, because you need to keep that energy of generosity going so that you do end up with adequate resources and a surplus of resources so that you can give to others. So if we have that real deep intention that keeps it very pure, where it's not self-centered, the karma of generosity works one way or another. They do say that even, so they call it kind of rough-minded individuals who are only giving out of some mundane motivation, and that might be it. I'll give to you so that I eventually get something, or some other motive. The act of just simply giving something does have some karma to it that's positive. But if we keep it really pure, if our motivation for engaging in generosity is bodhicitta, well, you've got a very powerful mind there that will guarantee unbelievable results for you and for others by virtue of that you will be with those resources that you can then benefit so many others through those resources that you will have from your karma. So this is why it's important to understand sort of the karma of generosity, and therefore the need to practice generosity. It's not something we can ignore. You might go, again, I'm really comfortable now and I'm perfectly fine. I'm glad that I got here. And like I said, not take any actions to assure that that's going to continue in this life as well as continue into future lives. So again, there is that component. Any questions on karma? I don't want to go too far into all the traditional teachings on karma, because as I said, most of you've sat through those before. Not that it doesn't hurt to hear them again, but maybe I should do one small teaching. Many of you have heard this before, and I think I even did it as part of the previous course. But just remember these 4 principles of karma, characteristics of karma, that explain how it works. The very first one is the idea of what? Anyone? Karma is definite. Definite or certain. By that we don't mean certain to ripen. That's a little bit later. We mean it is definite in terms of what type of karma it is you produced gives rise to a result that is in line with that. If you created a negative karma, it is inevitable that the suffering result will come from that. The suffering result only comes from negative karma. It can't come from positive karma. In terms of the positive karma, it will bring a result of happiness, of well-being. That well-being is reliant upon a cause that is an act of virtue, and it won't come from an act of non-virtue. So there's no mixing of these. If I did something that is unfavorable, I'll have an unfavorable result. If I did something that is favorable, I get a favorable result. Now, again, it looks weird in our culture because sometimes people seem to do something that's really horrible and they have a positive result, such as not being impeached or something. I don't know. Sorry. My politics comes out every now and then. So why does that happen? If we look at it from this principle, we have to say that even though there were negative actions that led to a particular thing that one didn't experience something negative from, that hasn't ripened yet. I mean, the actions that one does of, various things, stealing, whatever, lying, all that, the results of that will come way in the future. The more immediate results that one experience of getting away with it, say, let's use a different example of somebody who goes in to rob a bank, or rob an ATM or whatever, and they take that money and they say they get away with it. They never get caught, Well, you might look at it and say, well, they just engaged in an act of stealing and they got money from it. They had a positive effect in that they've got all that money that they're never going to face the consequences of that in this life. Well, unfortunately for them, they will face the consequences in the future. Now, where did that money come from that they stole? Why were they able to keep it? Why were they able to get away with it? That's due to their past generosity. Their past generosity allowed them to get those resources, but they got them in a negative way, so they will suffer from that in the future. So it's very hard to pick it all apart, but this is the Buddhist understanding, is that it's not linear in that direct way. I do something negative and I immediately face the consequences of it that are unfavorable. Rather, it's the idea that every seed we plant produces the potential to have those results, whether they be favorable or unfavorable, sometime in the future. But those depend upon various causes and conditions. The condition for the ripening of one's past generosity in this case came about through robbing a bank, through bad conditions, bad actions. But the ripening of that karma was from a positive seed that was planted in the past. So again, it gets very convoluted, but this is the general principle. It is definite in terms of what it will bring rise to. The results are always concordant with the causes. The second principle is that karma increases. It expands. It's not a linear thing in that way either, in that I do, give Nancy $20 and then 8 lifetimes from now, in some existence, she gives me $20. No, that $20 that I give her, that act of generosity, expands and increases. This is why we're able to attain such, phenomenal results from our actions, is that they multiply and increase over time and actually produce results that are so much greater than the seed that we planted. Good news for the virtuous ones, right? Bad news for the non-virtuous, because we could experience unbelievable suffering from the slightest action because it multiplies and increases. So the third and the fourth, I always present together because they are sort of like flip sides of the coin. One is if you didn't create the result, or if you didn't create the cause, you won't experience the result. So if you haven't created a virtuous cause, you can't expect to get the results of that. Let's say generosity, you won't be able to have the resources without having practiced the generosity. So if you don't have resources in your life, it means you haven't practiced generosity well enough to be able to make that materialize in your life. On the other hand, the fourth one, if you do engage in something, an action that you have committed, then it's not wasted. The results will definitely come into play at some point in the future. Depends upon a lot of causes and conditions, a lot of factors, because it's a dynamic process. But nonetheless, it won't be wasted. Now, of course, we can affect karmic processes through purification, which I'm not going to get into teaching today, but know that there are techniques that you can do to remove the power of these things that you've done that are negative. And of course, you also want to protect the mind so that those things that are positive don't get destroyed through strong anger and so on. That's why we'll get to patience. Again, they're not on the list anymore, but we'll get to patience eventually, the tools that we need to curtail our anger so that we don't destroy our virtues. But nonetheless, these four principles dictate how karma works, the sort of the rules of the road, that it's definite in terms of what you will experience in line with what you created, that it will multiply and increase, that if you didn't create it, you can't possibly get the result. And if you did create it, as Venerable Rabbeinu would say, honey, you're going to get the result. All right. So if we have some faith that those are the rules of the road, well, then we just try living our lives according to that. And in regard to generosity, it means then I want to be as generous as possible because I see that there's some karmic energy that I'm creating that will be useful in the future. And not to get too tightly around it in terms of me and what I need. The idea is that if I have all that, then I'm in a much better position to benefit others. I found it interesting when I was over in the master's program, I had the good fortune of working 18 years in San Francisco at a corporation, so I had a lot of resources I could draw from to live for 7 years in Italy and study. There were many people in the master's program who didn't have those resources. You try to help people here and there with what you can, but a lot of people really struggled. You see how useful it is to have resources, even just to study the Dharma in that way. So we can be very grateful again that we've created the causes for that. But again, don't rest on your laurels. Think that this is evidence that you have to continue to do that. That's the impetus for us to, have maybe a little bit of self-interest in that, but recognizing once more with bodhicitta motivation, it's so that we will always be in an opportune place to benefit others. Always be able to use our resources in that way. So any other final questions on karma? Yeah, Alex.
This may be taking the conversation a little bit sideways, and it's so fine.
Okay.
Do things cancel out each other? So if I, for instance, example, if I gave this homeless guy, somebody $20, then I regret it. And then I say, no, I don't regret it. That is very worthwhile. Okay, so positive, negative, positive. Do those wipe out one another, or is the positive going to go off this way, or is it going to go off that way?
Wow, I don't know if I can answer that. Alex's question is, yeah, I mean, like say we did have that case of giving the $20 to a homeless person, and then we regret it, but then say later after we've regretted it, we actually say, no, I was really glad that I did that. Do those cancel each other out? And do we end up with kind of just the net result of a positive action that will ripen? And I almost want to say that they are individual acts, but nonetheless, they do often say that the regret that we generate after a positive action does in some way diminish the effect of that virtuous seed. So I would say, again, because they're a thread of one act that we started with, there's probably going to be some amelioration of the effects from the very beginning that maybe get strengthened if we come back around through some different understanding. But we still created some moments of regret that probably need to be purified or in some way, offset. I don't know that. I've never heard that question asked, so I don't know that I can speak to a definite answer. I would say, again, we don't want to think everything too concretely either, which is a tendency that we might have, to think that, yes, there are karmic seeds or imprints that occur in the mind that then are carried forward and do that. But as I said, it's a very dynamic process. So in the light of that, I would think that it would be a dynamic process that you're going through of changing your mind in different ways that would influence things to some degree and not kind of be completely separate karmas in and of themselves. So, but that's just my thought. I shouldn't speculate. They always say that as a teacher, you shouldn't speculate about things, but
Well, we all have an accountant, heavenly bank of merit.
yeah,
Balance.
and we need a statement from them every month, so we know where we're at. Yeah, Mark said we all have an account in the Heavenly Bank of Merit. I mean, it would be nice if we had some awareness of where we were at with our kind of, debits and credits. Oh no, I need to put more deposits in because I'm really running low, create more merit, more positive potential, But I think we just work with the assumption that we always need to create more positive potential and to diminish those negative things that sort of draw it down. But it's very dynamic. It's always workable. I mean, even when we hear these amazing stories of like Milarepa, who, engaged in unbelievable, horrible acts in the beginning of his life, but was able to become enlightened in that lifetime, it's very heartening. Because we might look at what we've done and think it's nothing like what Milarepa's done, seriously, right? I mean, we weren't responsible for the death of 38, 39 people, that's huge compared to most of us, Yeah, Bill.
It seems like a lot of the things you're saying relate to, if I give somebody $20, well, then I'll get such and such back.
Right.
I don't know, I'm not comfortable with that at all.
Uh-huh.
My sense is that if I give somebody $20, that's its own reward.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bill's saying, yeah, the idea of giving and then with some expectation that there'll be some receive. And I'm not implying expectation in here. No. What I'm saying is that that's karmically how it works. And that's really just an understanding. And so again, if we are intent upon benefiting others, I'm mostly speaking to the need to practice generosity, because if we lack resources and if we lack opportune situations to be able to access the Dharma, work with the Dharma, continue to develop our minds, we're not going to be a best benefit to others. So it's really, you don't agree? Okay, in what way? I'm sorry. Yeah.
It sounds like that you're saying that if you don't have resources, you can't benefit others.
To the degree that you would like to. Yeah.
It seems like it's getting monetized.
No.
Maybe resources are more than money.
Yeah.
Resources are bigger than money.
Well,
Yeah.
I keep feeling like it's like.
But again, I'm really talking about, once more, the intention to give and the acts that follow from it. And so it's never really being quantified as some sort of physical thing. But obviously, but obviously every one of us benefits from our own generosity in terms of having food to eat. That food, you think, came from me going to the store and buying it and all the things, but it came primarily from your generosity. If you don't have food to eat, and there are many people in this world who don't have food to eat, it's very hard to have a spiritual life in the midst of that. I'm not saying impossible, but if you're spending your whole day walking miles to get fresh water and to get some grains of rice for your family to eat, I mean, you may not have the strength of mind to be able to benefit a lot of other beings, beyond that. The wonderful act that you're doing for your family, I'm not denying that, but I'm just saying that if we look at it in realistic terms, we do want to have lives that have a bit more of what we call leisure, so that we can then spend our life dedicated to the Dharma in greater effort. Anyway, but so back to what you were saying initially, Bill, though, I absolutely agree. We never want to give with the expectation of receiving. That's not part of the equation. Is like, that's an ulterior motive. That's, even if it's our own karma in the future that we're thinking about, because then it becomes very self-centered. It becomes just about me and what I need. Again, I'm always trying to frame everything we're doing in the light of, how do I best be a benefit to others? How do I make sure that in future lives I can continue to be of benefit to others? So again, and beings do need resources. Beings do need things in their lives. And if we can become the source of that for them, how wonderful. You know, it's a way to manifest that bodhicitta motivation in our acts. So anyway, these are interesting things. Well, we'll be discussing all these as we go through this. So any other comments on the karma of generosity? I'm just explaining it so we have an awareness that this is what's going on. It's not, again, to get too caught up in, you know, trying to make that your main motivation. It's just an understanding of how it works. Yeah, Space.
I have a hard time thinking, okay, somebody who lives in Flint, Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
where their children are getting brain damage
Sure.
from the water,
Mm-hmm.
and the children, but
Mm-hmm.
they did bad deeds in their last life.
Or some prior life. Uh-huh.
Yeah, in some prior life. And also what I've noticed living with people who don't have much
Right.
are
Right.
often the most generous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, those are all kind of things that can be acknowledged. I guess once more, when so what Space was saying is the two things: the understanding of children and families living in the Flint, Michigan area where there's brain damage from the lead in the water and all these things, and also the other observation that people who are often without the level of resources we have in this country certainly are oftentimes most generous in their spirit and in how they are in the world. I mean, these are interesting observations, and I can't explain, again, karmically what's all going on, but karma is nonetheless the explanation. It's not meant to be fair. It's not meant to be just. It's not like there's some, you know, measure of like, oh, well, that's unfair that infants would be exposed to that and have to experience brain damage. It's simply an explanation. And it should lead us to even greater compassion, because if beings, through the force of their ignorance, create the causes for that type of suffering in their lives, they're even greater objects of compassion for us and a desire to benefit them even more strongly. Because if we could help them to overcome not just the ignorance of how things exist, that's the deeper, the perfection of wisdom at the deepest level, but even understanding of karma. I mean, most beings don't live their lives with that awareness. You know, that the actions I'm doing are definitely shaping what I'm experiencing, and what I'm experiencing now was shaped by what I did in the past. So if we can impart some of that knowledge to them through our compassion by observing them in those situations, then I think it's a real service to them, and find a skillful way to do that. Again, most people, we probably can't do that. But in terms of the other one, I mean, when you do end up with some people who might seem the most generous in spirit who lack resources, well, you might look at it and say, well, that doesn't seem to work then, because how do they have the mind of generosity so omnipresent in their lives, but yet they don't have the resources that you would say karmically should materialize from that? I don't know. I mean, again, we can't think too much in terms of everything needing to ripen at the same time. You can have situations where someone can be having a life that is filled in with various karma that was negative, even though they may have some very positive qualities in the midst of that. And that happens frequently. You know, everything kind of has its own causal chain. So wonderful that people can still be very generous and kind in the midst of not having many resources in this world. But there are also a lot of people who are pretty horrible when they don't have resources in this world. You know, it's not a rule that if you end up without many resources, you're going to have a much more generous spirit. It's an observation of certain situations that, again, are karmically determined, but not cast in stone. Again, everything is workable, is changeable. So their situation can definitely change through the force of their generosity. Anyway, I don't want to go too deeply on it, because this gets to be, again, every situation has so many other factors that you don't even know. I mean, none of us know, because we don't have an awareness of the karma of that being in the past, of all the conditions that have ripened in that life, and so on. But we're taking this as, and this is maybe my last bit of advice that I should make sure that I share all the time, because Venerable Urbina always does this. She says, you don't have to believe in karma. It's not a thing that I believe in it or I don't. Use it as a working hypothesis. Use it as kind of like, I'm going to live my life as if all of my actions really matter. That's essentially what it's saying. As if what I do with my mind, what I do with my speech, what I do with my body, it all matters. Well, then you start being really attentive to what you're doing, and you probably will see some change in your life. You know, that's not the proof of karma, but it's leaning you in the right direction to say, this is a good working hypothesis. This is something I should be relying upon as to how I want to live my life. Because if I am that meticulous in how I pay attention to what I do and the acts of generosity that follow from this mind that gives and so on, that mind that wants to give and so on, well then, I'm going to have good results from that. It may just initially be how we feel good by virtue of that act of giving. But over time, having that faith and confidence that those things will materialize. So we can continue our development. We can continue to be a benefit to others. So that's the karmic bodhicitta kind of combination to make sure that we don't discard these teachings just because they're not something that we can get our heads around and don't have a complete belief in all the various things. It's not about belief. It's about living your life with purpose then. Thinking that everything does matter. Yeah, Asia.
I'd like to say something, and I apologize if it's not completely thought out or very well.
It's all right.
thought out.
It's all right. Yeah.
But it occurs to me that there is a relationship between the practice of generosity and the realization of non-self.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you give, or when you practice tumbling, or when you really invest yourself in that thought of giving everything away to others.
Right.
Maybe start to think in terms of there not being a difference between yourself
Yeah.
and there not really being a self to give something. There's kind of an overlap. I think I can't really see it clearly, but I feel like there's a relationship there.
Yeah.
And it's not transactional, but it kind of helps you to free yourself from the idea of self.
Very good. Yeah. So what Asia's bringing up for those online is the connection between our practice of generosity and the awareness of the lack of an independent self and all of this that we'll get into in the perfection of wisdom. Absolutely. That would have been the perfect segue had we more time to go into the next topic. The next topic on my list is the opposing mind of miserliness, which, is revolving around this strong sense of self that we're clinging to and that we want to protect and that we want to make sure all the resources of that self are protected and so on. That's absolutely a part of the thing that we have to overcome to diminish the miserliness and increase the generosity. That's why, again, all 6 of these work in tandem with each other. And if we can bring into play a lot more of the wisdom side of it and see that that delineation between self and others is just a nominal thing. It's nothing inherently there. If there is suffering in the world, it's meant to be alleviated regardless of whose suffering it is. And instead we tend to the need to relieve our own suffering, to be revolving around this strong sense of self and cherishing it more than others. So there's kind of these 2 thoughts of self-centeredness, self-cherishing, and self-grasping that are at the root of these negative states, these opposing states. So we'll get into all of this. This is great. You guys are doing really well, all of you. So, any other comments before we conclude today then? Yes, Alex.
I just want to comment on that, the one thing and kind of underline it a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
because I've heard some people say, well, if they don't have resources, that's because they deserve it. They did something in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore they are. Which has sometimes a little bit of, therefore I don't need to help them. And these are very different things.
Mm-hmm.
Where they are and how they got there versus how you respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Alex was just pointing out again that we might have those thoughts of if someone doesn't have resources that karmically they deserve it, and then we might act differently, that those should be seen, kind of. I mean, one of the phrase there about deserving, I really hate that phrase, and I know we try not to use. Deserve is not really the way we should be looking at it. If maybe it's just semantics, but the idea is that causes and conditions are playing out. Causes and conditions are always playing out in every one of our lives. And deserving is simply a label we put on it that does have a bit of that flavor of like you were a bad person and therefore this is your punishment. And that's not what's going on at all. Karma is not a system of reward and punishment. It's a law of cause and effect. As important in the same way that if you wanted to grow a garden of vegetables in the summer, you have to attend to it. You have to get out there and hoe the dirt and everything and get rid of the rocks and put nutrients into the soil and get the seeds in there and make sure it gets watered and gets enough sun and everything in order to get a garden at the end of summer. It's the same process. So it's not meant to be, again, kind of a denigration of anybody because they don't have an awareness of it or because they engaged in unskillful actions and what have you and have the outcome of that, the fruits of that. Rather, it's to once more see that it's a simple law of cause and effect. And the compassionate response, which is what you were getting at, Alex, the compassionate response is to see that beings are doing this all the time through the force of their lack of awareness and through the being under the control of the delusions, just like us. So don't think that we're so much greater or better or whatever. We're all kind of under the control of these factors, and we all need a greater awareness of them and an attentiveness to them. If we live our lives by this hypothesis, this working hypothesis of karma, you'll see different results over time. Absolutely. So I think that kind of, did that help take what you said and, I don't know, or were there other comments? Yeah.
Some people are very indifferent.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
to the situation. And to speak to Space's point, I think my own experience sometimes with those who have very little and are also generous, it's their experience of having very little that sparks that generosity in them. So it's been a gift to them somehow to have
Right.
little, so
Right.
that they get to that.
So real briefly online, there's the idea of not being indifferent to the suffering of others was the main point. And then secondly, in regard to what Space had said about the people who don't have many resources being quite generous, your thoughts, Alex, said it often comes from that lack of resources that people can open their hearts with some generosity. Again, to some degree that can play a role, but once more, we can also understand that not everybody who has that experience is equally generous or has that same generosity. So everything's conditioned. That's the thing, is like why you are generous now is because you've been generous in the past. It's all part of karmic seeds that are ripening. If we want to strengthen our ability to be generous in the future, we have to practice generosity now, because we're never going to have that strength of mind behind it if we don't. So again, we're going to get into these with these hindrances and that. But this was great. I think we did a good chunk of generosity. We'll continue with this next week. And I have a little handout that I'll give you next week rather than this week. We didn't really get into the topics yet that are on that handout. But in the meantime, be attentive to generosity in your life. Go back to, again, this idea of what are the ways that you are being generous and pushing yourself a little bit with regard to each day. Seeing, is there something more that I could be doing? And sometimes, like I said, it's just additional thoughts. As you're sitting there eating your food, think about mentally offering that to other beings who don't have food. Think about, doing things with other acts that you're engaged in. That idea of offering, being very kind of spacious with what we have, helps to get rid of this whole tightness around the self, this tightness around me, being at the center of the universe and it all being my food and my money and my this, right? Okay, let's do our prayers. Page 246. Speaking of generosity, we're going to practice generosity of merit now. All this positive potential that we've created, we're going to have the thoughts on page 246 and 247, these wonderful verses from Master Shantideva, about making everything that we've done here the cause for the alleviation of suffering of all beings that exist. And you might bring to mind those beings that you're specifically dedicating for, in those that you're holding in your heart right now. We want to have also this general intention that all beings benefit from what we've done here today. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. So then turn the page back and we'll do these two prayers, the one that's paper clipped to page 245 for His Holiness, and then the one on 244 at the bottom for Rinpoche. And you might bring to mind other teachers, those that you have in your life, whatever tradition they're from, as well as other teachers that exist in this world that are helping beings in their spiritual path. You know, we need these types of guides in this world and in our lives. So make strong prayers for the good health and long life of all spiritual guides, and for each and every one of us to have spiritual guides in all of our lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Okay, thank you all so much. Have a good week. So.